So small dogs are definitely much more difficult than large dogs are.
Except you can pick them up.
Well, yeah, they're easier. They're easier to manage and harder to train because they're small and they just kind of. It's very difficult. It's just really difficult to do small dogs. So this was really good because, as you can see, you're not trying to do an awful lot of training with her. What you're really trying to do is to try to make her understand that she doesn't do that. Did you get the stuff with the collar?
I did.
And does that make sense to you?
It totally does, yeah. Yeah, I think she's just so like reactionary and
Yeah.
it just is like.
Her
I
little
think
brain
that's
just goes, I'm supposed to bark at it.
Yep.
And that's that. And
Yeah.
if we could only solve that problem, everything would be
Yeah,
fine.
that'd be
This is why people use bark collars. Because to try to stop a dog from barking when they're barking is their very first reflex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick question. So for dogs that have kind of learned to bark at, anything and everything, does ignoring the behavior ever help? Or
Nope.
is it too entrenched in
It does
them?
not.
I wish. I really wish.
Maybe I should just not.
But essentially, because you're ignoring what the thing is, if you ignore a behavior, it has to be a behavior that is not self-reinforcing.
And that's the problem.
And barking is self-reinforcing. And in fact, a dog will continue to bark way beyond because it's also it feels good and it also they think it does something. It gets something done. So yeah, it's tough. Barking is the toughest. There was a shelter back in the Los Angeles area that a while ago. I don't know that they still do it, but they actually with dogs that bark a lot, they recommended debarking. So because they were getting so many because barking bothers the neighbors. If your dog bites you, it doesn't bother them.
Just don't bark.
Now, if your dog bites them, it bothers them. But barking, in fact, the Marin Humane Society used to handle barking complaints, and then they managed to turf it off onto the communities. So, in Marin County, each of the cities and counties they're the ones who have to deal with the bark complaints because they're just noise complaints. They're not dog complaints; they're bark noise complaints. So it's tough. I mean, really, it's tough stuff. And having had my own large reactive dog, I am really, really careful with everybody else's dog. I don't want to have another dog come up and get hurt by a dog. I don't want my dogs to bother other people. That doesn't mean that other people don't want to bother my dogs, but I try really hard not to. Okay, so desensitization and counter-conditioning is creating an association between a bad thing and a good thing. And what the thing is when you're doing desensitization and counter-conditioning, you have to always work the dog below their threshold level or right at and below the threshold level. If you work the dog when he's already exploding or he's already really, really anxious, you're not actually doing anything. If you're doing anything at all, you're reinforcing the wrong behavior. So you have to get the dog calm enough so that you can work, the dog can think. If the dog can't think, the dog can't learn. I mean, one of the things we say with anxious dogs is if a dog can't take a treat, it can't learn, right? So in this case, though, if a dog can't think, it can't learn. So you have to reduce the threshold. This is really difficult with most owners who really want to work the dog at the behavior problem level, right? They say, well, I need to know what to do when the dog is exploding. And you're trying to say you can't do anything and get anywhere with it. So desensitization and counter-conditioning are really difficult to work with clients. Now, if you are a day trainer and you go in and work with a dog every couple days or whatever, then you can do it. But you're still going to find your owners are probably going to blow it. So there you are, you're walking these dogs and you're doing all this work on the dog, and then the owners go home and say, I'm going to take the dog to the dog park. And just wait for the dog to do something bad. So, as we spoke about in the fearful class, having strangers feed fearful dogs often backfires. It's just most things that most owners want to do most of the time are not going to do any good, and the dog actually gets better. It gets worse. rather than getting better. So what is that? It says operant conditioning. I can't believe I did that. So operant conditioning is essentially training. The dog has something. The dog does something, is in control of his own behavior. So that's what operant conditioning is. And operant conditioning is anything where there's a behavior and a reward, or a behavior and some kind of consequence. And the antecedent in this case is just what is happening when the behavior occurs. So if you're walking your dog like John was walking the dog, that's the antecedent. The behavior is the barking, the consequence is what happens after the barking takes place. And so all operant conditioning works on that. So there are a lot of choices these days about different kinds of training, and every time somebody comes up with a new kind of lat bat or whatever it is, they all go, this is it. This is this is the thing.
What are those?
I'm going to go right all the way into them, or partially into them anyway.
Oh.
So because what people do is they think that this one works, and it's true. One method will work for one dog, but it won't necessarily work for another dog. So you can't always use the same method on every other dog, on every dog. But all of them do have some things going for them. So LAT is look at that. And look at that. Leslie McDevitt's book, Control Unleashed. How many people have a good writer, and she had a really reactive dog, and she has worked with this for a long time. So it's a good book. If you've got a reactive dog, reading Control Unleashed is a good one. Now, it was interesting because it was written for agility dogs to really work on the behavior mod for agility dogs. But in this case, it's extremely good for reactive dogs. It essentially teaches the dog, look at that, teaches the dog to look at the thing that they're afraid of and then look back at you. So you say, look at that. If they're afraid of a guy, you say, look at that. They look at that, and then they look back at you, and then they get rewarded. So it's a nice technique. A lot of people use it. Personally, I don't use it because I find that the dog's already going to look at that. And so I want to reward them for looking back at me. So, but it's the same thing, isn't it? The dog looks at something else. The difference is that some people don't want the dog to see the thing to begin with. And I'm fine with them seeing it. I just want them to look back at me. So that's kind of what you're doing here, is you're going, see that, look at me. See that, look at me. See that, look at me. And the idea is to take the sting out of the seeing that. It's to say, that's not a big deal. You don't have to worry about it. It's okay. It's if you were arachnophobic, and I showed a spider, and I looked at the spider, and I looked back at you, and I gave you a $100 bill. You don't like spiders, do you? But does that make sense? If you're whatever it is that you're looking at, you look at it, and then you look away. And as time goes on, you can look at it for longer and longer and longer and longer without having the problem with it. So it's a form of desensitization, but it is operant in that you are rewarded for looking back at the owner. So that's LAT. Then there's BAT. BAT is behavior adjustment training. That is one of the ones that's pretty popular nowadays. And it was put together by Grisha Stewart. She's a really good trainer. I think she's up in Alaska now. She got married and went to Alaska, and then I heard she got divorced. Maybe she's moving back to Seattle. I don't know. But anyway, so what happens with this is the dog tells you by body language that he or she is feeling uncomfortable, and then is allowed to retreat. So so you're walking towards another dog, and your dog starts maybe looking away or doing one of the other what are called calming signals or displacement behaviors. So they look away, their tongue comes out, they might shift a little bit, maybe shift a little bit backwards on their body, or their tail will go up or their tail will go down. What they're doing is they're saying something to you. And when you see the signals, you allow the dog to retreat. So you move the dog back. And I said here that this technique doesn't use treats. I understand that she now uses treats a lot more than she used to use treats. So, but when I first read the book and talked to her about it, she wasn't using treats for this. The reinforcement was the coming back. So the dog would go like this, start doing some kind of, displacement behavior. Then You'd call the dog back, come back to you, regroup, and go again. And as a behavior modification technique, I think it's excellent. As a training technique, it's hard. I mean, it's a really good thing to be able to use, but it's really, really, really difficult to actually do it. You need a very controlled location with very controlled dogs to begin with. So if I had a reactive dog, I'd be moving my reactive dog towards this benign dog. He would start showing me some displacement behaviors. I would allow him to retreat either by doing a U-turn myself or by just backing up myself. And then when he regrouped, he would decide then to go forward. To work with, like stud.
I was just gonna ask, do you think you could get away with using that, the stuffed dog?
You can only get away with using that until they figure out it's a stuffed dog. And, you know, that will happen. So then you have to move on to something else. So for the German Shepherd Coda that I was talking about earlier, yeah, you could certainly use that probably for several weeks before she finally figured out that it's not a real dog, and then you'd have to start all over. But it is, again, it's a nice technique, but you need a very controlled location where there's not going to be any dogs coming in except for the dogs that are in your program. And seems to me what will happen is that as soon as the people go out on a walk, everything gets thrown out the window. So I think it's a nice idea. I think certainly one of the best things about it is that it teaches our owners to watch body signals. You know, because when I used to teach difficult dog classes, I'd go, okay, you not only have to know what your dog is doing, what emotional content your dog is showing, you have to be able to read your dog from above them and behind them. So it's not good enough that you can do it and read a tongue flick. You can't see the tongue flick. You can't see that the dog's eyes are dilated. You can, however, see if the ears start to go back. You can watch the tail, and you can certainly watch the hackles. So if a dog is kind of predatory, you can see that, right? The dropped head. So learning to actually read dog body language from above and behind is much more difficult than reading it from the front. So if you can, you know, watch your dog's body language while you're walking, I think it's a great idea. Now, one of the things that really impedes learning the dog's body language is pulling on leash. So as soon as the dog is pulling on the leash, they're not showing you any body language at all. So it is, you know, it's imperative, as I said before, to actually get the dog to not pull on the leash when you're walking them. So I like it. I like a lot of parts. I like a lot of parts of everything. It's just you know, when you're working with real people in the real world, some things have more of an impact than other things do. Then there's CAT. So CAT is constructional aggression treatment. It is developed by Dr. Jesus Ruiz and Kelly Snyder. And it's kind of the opposite of BAT. And I did correct it on this slide, but it's not corrected on your slide. The tester presents a second dog to a reactive dog at a distance. So I used to do this when CAT was first introduced. I tried it in the pavilion at the Marine Humane Society. A great place to do it. Not the pavilion, in the auditorium. So I'd have the reactive dog down on the stage, and I'd bring the benign dog, usually Strider, round to the edge of the seats, and the reactive dog would see it and go ballistic. And the idea behind BAT is that you let the dog go ballistic, bark lunge, bark lunge, bark lunge, bark lunge, and this dog, the calm dog, just stays there. Da 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 da, nothing at all. And then when this dog finally calms down, that dog moves away. So the reward for the reactive dog is the moving away of the fear object, whatever it might be. If it could be a guy, it could be, you know, a person in a hat, or it could be another dog. And So the dog is getting reinforced by its negative reinforcement. The dog is actually getting reinforced by the leaving of the other dog. This is even worse to try to implement than bat. Yeah, because now you're trying to figure out a way that can happen. So in the videos that I saw of them, and I think that both of these two people again are really great people, and they've come up with a viable idea, but it can only be done in a controlled location. Because what happens is you bring the tester dog closer and closer and closer and closer and closer over a period of time until the two dogs can touch noses. But, so you do this beautifully, everything works out well. Now you have to start it with a new dog because they don't generalize well. It's an awful, they're place learners, they learn in one place, but they don't generalize anything else well. So now you got to get a new dog, then you got to get a little dog, then you got to get, a dog with prick ears or whatever. So the dog can start generalizing that all dogs are not a threat. Meanwhile, while you're working on this, if the dog has any kind of a bad incident, you lost pretty much everything.
What about their cortisol level though?
Oh, their cortisol levels
bark,
are
bark, bark, bark.
probably higher than all get out, yeah.
So they would then, I would think, react more quickly than, you'd have to wait so long.
You do have to wait a long time. It was, my consults were usually an hour and a half, and that wasn't long enough by any means to do this. And I'm not saying that I'm really good at it anyway, because this was, I had seen the videos, I'd watched what they'd done, so I was trying it on my own, but you have to be careful because if you're dealing with clients and they see their dog seeming to get worse, they're not going to believe you. They're going to think, well, this isn't doing any good. In fact, it's doing bad things to my dog. Yeah.
So is the idea that they're learning that the reacting doesn't do anything to the
Right.
work, that it's only like when they stop?
That
So it
the
makes it not
the
So the idea is that they'll eventually learn if I just don't do anything.
that's right.
Does it work in the real world?
Well, I've never seen it work in the real world. Now, but I have limited experience because, I don't know. I think these people are from Texas, so presumably they do it in Texas. I don't know how well it's worked in Texas. Yeah.
I'm kind of missing something here, because to me, if a dog is reacting and makes what the reaction go away, didn't you just reinforce that behavior?
No, because you're not actually. The dog has to be calm and quiet before the dog leaves. So it's not that the barking is making the dog go away, it's that the quiet is making the dog go away. As long as the dog is reacting, the other dog stays there. But the silence actually makes it go away. Again, this takes a phenomenal amount of patience.
And then would that be considered like almost like
Um,
kind of shut down and
Yeah, well, it depends on the shutdown factor. You're doing it far enough away that the dog is probably not going to shut down literally. Because if you were really, really close, then the dog would shut down because nothing worked. But in this case, something is working, and you're far enough away that it may very well work.
Have you ever seen this have bad consequences on the calm dog?
Well, that's another really good point. So you have this dog who's just Mr. Strider, who's just really wonderful, going, oh my God, how long do I have to put up with this? Yeah, and the fact that Strider was also reactive when I first got him, it was hard for him to do it. So what we would start to do, we'd start doing it with Stud, because he doesn't worry about stuff like that. And then I'd bring Strider in after a while, But it is, and we also had about 3 or 4 dogs that we could use. With certain behavior modification, I even used to use Luke, who is reactive himself. But he did really well, but we could never have done this with Luke. He would have blown completely. You have to have very calm dogs. Aspen is interesting because I'll use her, but she hits a point where she's like, I'm not doing it now. And I could make her, but it's not fair on her to, speaking of cortisol, if you're being barked at constantly and you're going, but please Mom, don't make me do it. We used all our dogs to meet strange dogs when we were doing evaluations. And there comes a point where they just go, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to do it anymore. And you have to respect that. Because
just her.
Total denial on the part of the
Like,
owner.
I mean, I think she has good intentions, I think, but
Mhm.
she's, she told me when her dog is latched on to her old boxer, it's a pit mix she got from Mexico, that his teeth were gone. It was okay because he didn't have any teeth. Well, he's a really big ball dog, so he had his typical, it was filed out, or somebody had filed the dog's teeth on purpose. But he had teeth, plenty of teeth, and it was,
He just didn't have canines.
he still had them, just a little bit filed down.
Yeah.
Anyways, it was, but do you ever have just, this is okay, they're fine, it's similar to this, they're very small compared to the situation you're dealing with the cattle dog and the shepherd, and just like what's fair.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who do not understand that you can hurt a dog psychically, that you can give a dog traumas that they cannot get over. And certainly I've seen them, and I'm sure everybody else has met 2 or 3 of these. I like the people who say, "Oh, let the dogs work it out, they'll work it out, everything is going to be fine." There is an art to being a consultant, and one of the most important parts of that art are learning to let things go. Because we cannot control everything.
Yes, I know. I still have dreams. I dreamt about that guy again.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a problem.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know how to let go.
yeah. By the way, the one I was talking about, that wasn't him. That's a different one.
You know what? Because you said they
It
had
was
another dog. I knew it wasn't the same.
Yeah.
Dog, but that's bad. You'll talk about it, right? And maybe
Yeah,
next week,
it's
or-
going to happen. I've got 2 dogs to talk about next week that we haven't gotten
This
to
one
this
is
time.
just everything.
Yeah, because I mean, it is.
It's choosing a dog over your own child. I mean,
It
it's
is, or choosing a dog over another dog, or thinking that dogs don't have feelings. Whatever. There's all different kinds of ways of messing around with us, with dogs, and because dogs can't say, I'm traumatized. Although the son in that case could say, I'm traumatized. It's really hard on dogs. But yes, letting things go is very, very difficult. But if you want to be a consultant, you have to. Because otherwise you'll carry around with you all of the dogs that you've seen and all of the horrible cases that you've seen. It's one of the things that happens when you're working in a shelter and you do evaluations and then you have to make decisions like euthanasia. After a while, they just overwhelm you and you can't do it anymore. And it's just like poor Strider working in CAT. I just can't do this anymore. I'm not going to be able to do this. So the next one is Cam. This is mine. Okay. This is because I figured you have to do a CA. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll just do this one. So this is cognitive or creative, depending on what you want to think, anthropomorphism, behavior modification, with little exclamation points behind it because it's not really real. But the fact is that this is really important. These are the things that I think are really important when you're working with a dog. You have to figure out what the mood of the dog is. You just can't say, I'm going to put this dog at the end and have another dog come towards it. You have to figure out where your dog is emotionally first, and then help him change it. And one of the best ways to do it is to change fear into fun because the brain cannot hold those 2 emotions at the same time. So when you're doing your find its, Mochi has now changed her mind from barking and lunging to, oh goody, this is going to be fun. I'm going to find it. So figuring out what your dog does with that. Understand what motivates the dog when he or she is relaxed and comfortable. Practice at home in a safe location. So, do your U-turns in your yard or whatever so that the dog actually starts getting the behavior that you want him to do it. Then work outside the dog's threshold until you're sure she is ready for the next step. If you are working, this is an important consideration. If you're working with a dog that won't look back at you when you're walking him, so you're walking along and you say the dog's name and they won't look back at you, the dog is working outside its threshold. If you have taught the dog to look back at you and the dog won't look back at you, then you're working outside the dog's threshold and you better take a step back. Just take a step across the street or whatever. And then the
environment isn't conducive.
And the dog isn't able to cope because they're being hyper vigilant. They don't have to look back at you for long, but when you say the dog's name, Aspen, they look up at you, and then they can look back at something else as well. So you're trying to get that kind of thing, and then You have to appear relaxed and in control, because if you do not appear to be relaxed and in control, the dog will know it. So that means you have to fake it. And faking it is difficult. You know, I have several clients right now where we've actually come up with some exercises before they go for a walk. The dog has to sit and wait, and then the dog has to sit and wait once they're outside the door as well. So it's sit, wait, go through the door, sit, wait. Then the owner goes, takes a stick of chewing gum, puts it in their mouth so that they can breathe. Because, you know, if you got a reactive dog and you're walking, you hold your breath all the time. So you have to breathe. So chewing gum really helps with breathing. And then just really practicing walking and rehearsing and mentally rehearsing over and over and over again what you're going to do. If there's a dog that comes around this corner, what am I going to do? If there's a dog that comes around that corner, what am I going to do? Even to the extent of saying, well, I can just turn and we're going to run. And if we run, I'm going to go, yay, let's go. I'm going to pretend to have a good time. So that's creative. The reason I call this anthropomorphism is because you're putting yourself in the dog's place. And that is anthropomorphic. But it's still real, right? If you think your dog is afraid, guess what? They're probably afraid. I find that most clients are pretty right about their dog's emotional state. Some aren't. Some of them think that their dogs are scared when the dog's actually kind of a bully, and many people think that their dog is aggressive when the dog is just scared. But if you really start to get it, they'll pick up on it. Okay, so then the next ones are all the actual exercises. So we'll get to those next week, and then I'm going to we're going to talk about a couple of cases that have come up, Miriam's case and then yours. And also I want to do what I think of as the best stuff to do in a reactive dog class. Okay? All right. Thank you guys all for coming on Saturday. I appreciate it. And I'll see you next week.